I remember the exact moment the room went silent. It wasn't during a toast or a prayer or even one of Dad's awkward lessons in discipline he liked to lecture us with at the dinner table. It was the moment my 11-year-old daughter stood up, calmly, confidently, looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Mom, should I show them the business card from Forbes?" And just like that, forks hit the plates, jaws hit the floor. You know how in movies, everything slows down when something dramatic happens? It felt exactly like that. Time stretched. I looked around the room, my father's eyebrows twitched, my brother's mouth hung open, and my cousin choked a little on his red wine. Even my sister-in-law, who usually kept a smug smile ready for any occasion, looked speechless. Me? I just looked at Lila. She stood there in her little burgundy sweater dress and black boots. The same boots I told her not to wear because they were too fancy for a family dinner. But there she was, standing like a tiny CEO in training, holding a white linen napkin in one hand and that glossy card in the other like it was a sword. I smiled. I didn't answer her right away. I didn't need to. Because in that one moment, everything I had been fighting for finally landed, right in the middle of that table. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind for just a second, because none of this would make sense if you didn't know who I was sitting across from. At the head of the table sat my father, Charles Carter, a retired Army colonel with one facial expression: disappointment. My whole life, I'd been trying to decode what kind of success he actually respected. Medals? Sure. Medical degrees? Absolutely. Military? Of course. But anything creative? Anything entrepreneurial? Forget it. Then there was my older brother, Darren. Finance bro turned hedge fund hotshot. He made his first million at 28 and never lets anyone forget it. His voice had that tight, self-satisfied tone, like every sentence was a TED Talk. Diversify your income. I just park my money in Florida real estate now. Celine, you should really learn to scale. To them, I was the lost one, the family detour, the girl who wasted her potential, the one who dropped out of med school to chase what they all saw as a glorified hobby, homemade skincare. And yet, there I was, seated next to them, having built something real, something that mattered. But they didn't know that, because I stopped telling them years ago. Why? Because every time I did, it felt like I was auditioning for their approval, like I needed permission to chase something different, something not on their map. But I wasn't alone anymore. At the other end of the table sat my daughter, Lila Carter, 11 years old going on 30, sharp as a whip, but with a heart that feels everything. She's watched me struggle. She's watched me build. She's watched me cry into spreadsheets at midnight and wake up smiling the next morning because I believed in what I was doing. And that night, she had watched them. Her grandpa, her uncle, her cousins dismiss me again. It started the way it always does. My father leaned in across his sweet potato casserole and said, "You know, Celine, you could have made something of yourself. You were the smartest one. I guess not everyone's built for pressure." My brother laughed, that dry, cruel laugh he saves for people he thinks are beneath him. "She's still selling homemade lotion, Dad. It's cute, but let's be real. You'll die broke with that kind of dream." I didn't flinch, not anymore. I've built up armor over the years. I just reached for my water glass and nodded politely like I always do. But Lila, sweet, fiery Lila, looked at me, then at them, and stood up like she was about to deliver a speech at the United Nations. "Mom," she said, "should I show them the business card from Forbes?" Everything stopped. You could have heard the dog breathing in the next room. That's how we got here, to the moment where silence said everything words never could. And in that frozen pause, between my daughter's question and the world catching up, I realized something. This wasn't just a clapback. This was the moment they found out who I really was. I wish I could tell you that I walked into that Thanksgiving dinner full of confidence, that I knew this year would be different. But the truth? I almost didn't go. For 3 days, I stared at the invitation text from Darren like it was a job interview I couldn't prepare for. Dinner at 4. Casual. Everyone's coming. Everyone. meant judgment and khaki pants. It meant my dad's long-winded monologues about honor and sacrifice. It meant Darren's bragging, his wife Paige's pitying looks, and our cousin Ryan pretending not to remember what I did for a living again. But I went. Because Lila wanted to see her grandpa, and because part of me, no matter how much I deny it, still craved that flicker of acknowledgement. That small nod from my dad that said, "You turned out okay." I drove the 2 hours to Houston blasting 2000s R&B just to stay calm. I wore my best jeans and a cozy ivory sweater. Not too flashy, not too plain, just enough to say, I'm doing all right. And I am. I really am. I live in a sweet little townhome in Austin. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I bought it last year, after 3 years of renting while growing Bearkind, my all-natural skincare line. What started in my kitchen with mason jars and coconut oil now ships to over 20 states. We have a website, a logo I designed myself, and 4 contract employees who believe in what we're doing. I'm not rich, I'm not viral, but I'm stable. And after everything I've been through, that's a win. But my family doesn't see any of that. To them, I'm still the dropout. The girl who walked away from a full ride to med school at UT Austin after 2 years, because something inside me just kept whispering, this isn't you. My dad, Charles, didn't take that well. He didn't yell or cry, he just went quiet, that kind of silence that says, you've let me down. And in our house, silence was punishment, a punishment that never quite ended. After Mom died, my mother, Miriam, when I was 27, it got worse. She had been the buffer, the only one who truly saw me. She would hold my hand under the table when Dad got too intense. She called my Etsy store a rebellion with a heartbeat. When she was gone, it was just me and the storm. And Darren filled the vacuum with ego. He took Dad's approval like a trophy and ran with it. He graduated from Wharton, married a lawyer, had twins, and bought a boat, of course. He never outright insulted me, but his compliments felt like stabs wrapped in ribbon. You're really doing the natural thing, huh? That's cool. Paige makes her own kombucha sometimes, too. To them, I was a phase that never ended. And yet, despite everything, I've spent the last 5 years rebuilding my life from the ground up. I got out of a toxic marriage. My ex-husband, Joel, left me after saying, I didn't sign up to be married to someone with a hobby. Lila was 4 at the time. She saw me cry on the bathroom floor more times than I care to admit. But she also saw me get up. She saw me pack orders at midnight, heard me whisper affirmations into cracked mirrors, watched me run out of printer ink before a craft fair and laugh my way to Walgreens in pajamas. She never doubted me. She believed before I did. That's why when I look at Lila, I don't just see my daughter. I see my second chance, my reason, my proof that love and belief and work can actually rewrite a life. And still, despite all of it, my family doesn't ask questions. They don't check my website. They don't ask about my day. Because to them, unless you're on a magazine cover or driving a Tesla, you're just playing pretend. So walking into that house? That was more than a holiday. That was walking into a courtroom where the jury had already made up its mind. I didn't expect anything to change that night. I just wanted to survive the meal, avoid the passive-aggressive digs, and drive home before the pumpkin pie. But life has a funny way of flipping scripts when you least expect it. And as I stood in that entryway, one hand on Lila's shoulder, the other holding a store-bought pie, I had no idea that the next 2 hours would change everything. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the house. But all I could feel was the weight of expectation pressing down on my shoulders. It was the same every year, familiar walls, familiar tension. The Carter house never changed. Not even the beige wallpaper in the dining room that Mom had once threatened to replace with something less military funeral. Everyone was already seated when Lila and I arrived. My brother Darren gave me his usual once-over, like he was scanning a resume. Hey, Celine, he said. Glad you could make it. We were starting to think you'd gotten stuck in traffic or in one of your pop-up booths. His smile was thin and sharp, like a knife made of compliments. No booths lately, I replied. We sell online now. He nodded, unimpressed. Dad, sitting at the head of the table in his pressed flannel and stiff posture, barely looked up. You're late, he muttered. By 3 minutes, I said, trying to smile. We brought pecan pie. Store-bought, he said, eyes back on his plate. Figured. That was his gift, cutting you down without raising his voice. I helped Lila take off her coat and guided her to the seat beside me. She squeezed my hand under the table, her small fingers warm and strong. Dinner started with the usual talk. Paige, Darren's wife, described the twins' new private school with subtle references to tuition costs. Cousin Ryan bragged about landing a tech job in Dallas where he got equity options. I nodded politely, pretending to understand or care. When they finally asked about me, it was like someone had checked a box on a to-do list. "So, Selene," Paige said sweetly, "how's the skin thing?" "It's going well," I said, forcing cheer. "Bearkind is growing. We just fulfilled our largest order to date, and we're planning to—" "Must be nice," Darren interrupted. "Having a little side hustle while raising Lila. You're lucky you don't have to worry about real overhead." He laughed. Paige chuckled. Dad didn't look up. My hands were under the table, clenched into fists. Side hustle. That's what they saw it as. Never mind the 14-hour days. Never mind the business license, the accountant, the supplier contracts I negotiated alone. Never mind the fact that I'd broken even in my 3rd year and was now bringing in consistent 5-figure months. To them, if it wasn't an office with a nameplate, it wasn't real. "At least you're not asking us for help," Darren added. "Not that she ever has," Paige said, trying to soften the blow. "You're independent," my dad finally said, his voice unreadable. "That's one word for it." I felt my face flush. I sipped water to buy time, to swallow the bitterness rising in my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the sleepless nights, about the customer who sent a thank you note because our eczema balm helped her daughter sleep through the night for the first time in months. I wanted to show them the spreadsheet I'd color-coded for Q4. I wanted them to see me, but I didn't. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew they didn't want to understand. They wanted to win. That's how it had always been. Dad valued structure, status, discipline. Darren chased power like it was oxygen. And me? I chased purpose. And in this house, that made me the weird one. Still, I tried to hold the line. I focused on Lila, who was quietly chewing her mashed potatoes, her eyes darting between me and the rest of the table. She wasn't clueless. She saw every eye roll, every jab. She always did. Then it happened. As we moved into dessert, my father leaned back in his chair, looked straight at me and said, "You know, Selene, I still think it's a shame. You were the smartest of the bunch, could have made something of yourself." I blinked. I did make something of myself. I'm talking about something real, a legacy. You gave up med school for lotions. Darren snorted. "You'll die broke if you keep chasing passion. Passion doesn't pay taxes." The table laughed. That's when I felt it break inside me, not anger, not even hurt, just a quiet snapping, like the last thread of hope that they might one day say, "We're proud of you." Before I could respond, I felt Lila's hand slip away from mine. She stood up, calm, collected. And then she said it. "Mom, should I show them the business card from Forbes? They say you only grow tired of disrespect when your self-worth starts to wake up." I didn't realize how exhausted I was, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, until that car ride home from a family dinner nearly a year before the night. Lila stood up with that business card. It was another Carter holiday special. Same table, same digs. That time, Dad said I was too sensitive when I asked him not to call my business cute. Darren told me I should get a real job before 40. Paige patted my hand and said, "It's okay. Not everyone's meant to be successful." I smiled. I swallowed it. Again. But in the car, Lila was silent the entire ride. Unusual for her. No singing along to the radio, no humming, no asking if we could stop for ice cream. Just silence. When I pulled into our driveway, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. "Mom, do you think Grandpa's right? That you're not successful?" I froze, my hand still on the wheel. I turned and looked at her. Those big eyes full of questions no 11-year-old should have to ask. "No, baby," I said, "but I think I've let them make me feel that way, and I'm not doing that anymore." That was the moment. The shift. The silent promise I made to myself in the dark, in that parked car. I wasn't going to argue with them anymore. I wasn't going to prove anything. I wasn't going to wait for applause from a crowd that never clapped for me in the first place. I was going to bet on myself, fully, unapologetically. No more playing small to keep the peace. I didn't start by changing everything overnight, but I changed enough. I cleaned out the garage and turned it into a real workspace. I invested in branding, not just logos, but identity. I hired a college intern to help with product photos. I learned how to do paid social media ads. I applied for a small business grant, and when I didn't get it, I applied for another, and another. I launched a new product line. I pitched myself to podcasts, blogs, local media. Every no fueled me. Every maybe gave me hope. I made a spreadsheet titled Proof of Progress and updated it every Friday night with sales numbers, social metrics, customer reviews, anything that reminded me I wasn't standing still. The biggest shift? I stopped filtering myself. No more soft language on social media. I told my story, mess and all. And I wrote a post about how I left med school, how I started Bearkind with $1,200, and how I used to cry while packing orders because I was terrified of failing. That post? It went viral. Not a million views viral, but enough to draw in thousands of new followers who connected with my honesty. And then came Forbes. I'll never forget the email. Subject line, Forbes Next 100, feature opportunity. At first, I thought it was a scam, but it wasn't. A writer had come across my Instagram post and clicked through my entire site. She said the authenticity hit her like a punch wrapped in kindness. They were doing a feature on up-and-coming eco-conscious entrepreneurs. They wanted me. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then I laughed. Then I cried. Then I printed the email, taped it to my mirror, and read it every morning for a week. The article came out 3 weeks later. Short blurb, a photo of me smiling with my products, and one quote they pulled from our call. I built a business with bare hands and a full heart. I don't need anyone's permission to succeed. They sent me a courtesy box in the mail, magazine copies, a thank you letter, and a glossy little business card embossed with the Forbes logo and my name beneath it. I showed it to Lila first. Her eyes lit up. She asked if she could keep one in her backpack to remind people what women can do. That's the moment I knew. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about legacy, about showing my daughter what it looks like to reclaim your worth, about refusing to shrink just because someone else refuses to see you. I didn't bring that card to Thanksgiving to flex. I didn't even bring it at all. Lila did, because she knew, maybe better than I did, that truth deserves a seat at the table. You'd think when a child interrupts a Thanksgiving dinner, the adults would brush it off with a smile or a gentle shush. But when Lila stood up and said, clear as day, "Mom, should I show them the business card from Forbes?" No one moved. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Like a question she already knew the answer to, like a bomb she was about to gently place in the center of that oakwood table. Darren blinked first. Wait, what? His laugh came out strained, like he was trying to catch up to a joke that had already landed. Lila reached into her sweater pocket and pulled it out. This small, elegant rectangle of glossy cardstock, clean white background, embossed Forbes logo at the top, my name, Celine Carter, founder and CEO, Bearkind, just below in crisp, bold lettering. She walked around the table and handed it straight to my father. Now let me be clear. My father doesn't do reactions, not big ones. His army training made sure of that. But when he took the card from Lila's outstretched hand, I watched his face do something rare. He paused, his brow furrowed, not in disapproval, but confusion. His eyes scanned the text again, then again, like he was trying to rewrite what he was seeing into something he could understand. "Is this real?" he finally asked. "Yes," I said, voice steady. "I was featured in Forbes last month. They selected me for their Next 100 Founders to Watch list." No embellishment, no apology, just facts. The silence stretched again. Darren leaned over to look at the card. Paige tilted her head like she was watching a magician reveal a trick. "Wait, Forbes? Darren asked. "Like the magazine?" "That's usually what the logo means," I replied. Lila sat back down beside me, grinning like she'd just won a school debate championship. Her hands were in her lap, swinging slightly under the table. Cousin Ryan spoke next, eyebrows raised. "That's impressive, Celine. Wow, I didn't know you were, doing all that." "You never asked," I said, and I didn't mean it to cut, but it did. It landed like a stone dropped in a still lake. Paige tried to pivot. So what's your company called again? Bearkind. We make eco-friendly skincare products, vegan, sustainable, and cruelty-free. We launched 3 new lines this year. One of them sold out in 6 hours. 6 hours? Darren echoed. We had a wait list. It's not a hobby anymore. Now the tide had turned. The energy around the table shifted, like the air after a summer storm. No one was mocking me now. They were recalculating, repositioning, trying to figure out how to square this new image of me with the one they'd built in their heads. Dad held the card in both hands like it might disappear if he blinked too hard. "Why didn't you ever mention this?" he asked. I looked him in the eye, because every time I did, you dismissed it, so I stopped trying to convince you it mattered. He didn't argue. For once, there was no pushback, just the quiet sound of forks resting on plates. "You know," I added, "I didn't start Bearkind to impress anyone. I started it because I needed to build something that reflected who I really was, something that could help people, something Lila could be proud of." I glanced at her then. She was beaming. "And I am," she said. "I'm proud of you, Mommy." That cracked something in me, not pain, release, like a pressure valve letting go after too many years of holding my breath. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even nervous. I felt seen, not by the people who doubted me, but by the one person who truly mattered. And the best part? I hadn't demanded their respect. I hadn't begged for it. I had simply shown up, done the work, and let the truth speak for itself. By the end of dinner, Dad was quiet. Not cold, just quiet, reflective. Darren didn't say much else, though I caught him Googling something under the table. Paige asked for my Instagram handle before we left. As Lila and I walked to the car, she slipped her hand into mine. "You didn't have to say anything," she said. "They saw it." "They did," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "They finally did." But the real twist? I didn't need them to anymore. The drive home that night felt different. Not quieter. Lila talked the whole time, but lighter, as if something heavy had finally lifted off my chest after years of trying to carry it without letting anyone see the strain. I glanced at her in the passenger seat, still clutching that now famous business card like a golden ticket. She had folded it neatly into the front pocket of her little crossbody bag. Every few minutes, she would peek inside to make sure it was still there. "You were amazing, Mom," she said, kicking her boots against the edge of the seat. "You were the amazing one," I replied. "I didn't even bring that card. You did." Because I knew they wouldn't listen unless they had to. That hit me harder than anything said at the dinner table. She didn't say it bitterly, just truthfully. Honestly, like it was a fact she'd learned the same way a child learns that the stove is hot or that pencils break when you press too hard. She'd been watching all along, and that's what stuck with me the most. I always thought this fight, this grind to be seen, heard, respected, was mine alone. I thought I was shielding her from the worst of it. But children don't just hear our words. They absorb our silences. They read our body language. They memorize our masks. She saw it all. She saw me come home from family events, smile tight as wire, shoulders drawn up to my ears. She heard me tell friends I was fine when orders were delayed, or my website glitched, or my taxes made me cry. She knew I kept my dreams small in rooms where people love to feel big, and somehow, instead of that breaking her faith, it built it. That night, after we got home, she followed me into the kitchen. I was putting away leftovers when she pulled herself onto a stool and said, "Do you think they believe you now?" I looked at her. My daughter. My mirror. My reminder of everything I've survived and everything I'm still becoming. "I think they finally see me," I said, "but I stopped needing them to believe in me a long time ago." That's the truth. There was a time I would have given anything for Dad to call me successful, for Darren to ask how I built my business instead of whether it was still a thing, for anyone at that table to look at me without the invisible measuring tape they'd been holding since I dropped out of med school. But now I had built something with my bare hands, something that mattered, not because it was flashy, but because it was mine. I had built a business that gave people clean skincare they could trust. I had built a life where I could work on my terms. I had built a home where my daughter could grow up knowing that success comes in many forms and that courage doesn't need permission. They hadn't changed me. I changed me. And once I stopped performing for them, I started living fully for me. In the days after that dinner, a funny thing happened. My dad called me. Not to apologize, not quite, but to ask about my business, about Bearkind. He wanted to know how I got featured in Forbes, what made me start the brand in the first place. He didn't say he was proud, but he listened. And for Charles Carter, that was more than I'd ever gotten. Darren sent a LinkedIn request a week later. I ignored it. I'm not angry at them anymore. I've let that go, not for them, for me. Because holding on to resentment is just carrying their limitations in my pocket, and I've got better things to carry now, like samples for a new product launch, or Lila's science project, or the key to my own damn office. So here's what I've learned. You don't owe anyone your silence to keep the peace. You don't need to shrink to make others comfortable. You don't have to wait for the world to clap. You can clap for yourself. Most of all, success isn't about who notices. It's about who you become when nobody's looking, and who you stay true to when they finally do. And if you're lucky, if you do it right, you might raise a daughter who knows her mother is a force to be reckoned with, not because she was approved of, but because she was unshakably herself. So if you've ever been the black sheep, the underestimated one, the dreamer they didn't take seriously, just remember, you don't need their permission to rise. You only need your own belief, and maybe a little voice at the table, like Lila's, reminding you how powerful you already are. If this story touched you, made you think of your own journey, or reminded you of someone who's out there proving people wrong, give this video a like. Drop a comment below and tell me what you're building, chasing, or fighting for. Share this with someone who needs the push. And if you want more stories like this, raw, real, and rooted in resilience, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and remember, you don't need applause to be proud of your story, just the courage to keep writing it.